All right, so it looks like we've hit 11:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Like Kelly said, my name is Michael Brown. Today I'll be taking us through an AP invoice automation process. Again, this was briefly covered in the first presentation. This process was built for a major U.S. city, and I'll be taking us through that today. This process obviously begins with an invoice or invoices being imported into the on-base system. There's a multitude of different ways that can happen for both emailed invoices as well as mailed invoices. So for those emailed invoices, you could take advantage of something called Mailbox Importer, which is an on-base module that monitors an email mailbox and then brings those invoices in. Once those invoices are brought in, you can either manually index them and manually classify them, or you can utilize something like advanced capture, which is a forms recognition package that will allow the system to automatically recognize that particular invoice and then pull data off of it. Another option that you have is to utilize a company like FileSolve, where you forward those emails directly to us. We receive those emails electronically, we pull out the attachments, and then we do the classification and indexing, and then push them back into your system. For the mailed invoices, you can certainly open those physical mailed invoices and scan them in on site. You can then also manually index them or use advanced capture, again, that forms recognition package. Or like we have some clients that do, FileSolve picks up your mail, whether that's a monitored PO box, or we have a courier that comes to your location and picks those mailed invoices up. We then open those, scan them, run them through our classification and indexing process, and then we deliver the metadata as well as the images back into your system. So those are a couple of ways that we can get those invoices into the AP automation system. Now, my demo is going to pick up after that process, so the invoices have already been brought in through whatever form or fashion. Now, what you're seeing on your screen is what's called a personal page. So for those of you that have been sitting through the presentations today, this is going to look very familiar to you. For users who have just joined, I'll briefly touch on the personal page. So the personal page is a screen that you're greeted with when you first log into the on-base Unity client. And it shows different shortcuts to different features and functionality that you commonly use for your particular job. So on this particular personal page that you see here, I have different workflow queues. And these workflow queues represent different steps in the invoice approval process where an action needs to be taken on a particular invoice. So you can see we have an exceptions queue, an actual processing queue where I'm assigned an invoice and I'm working that invoice, and then on hold where, if I need to put an invoice on hold and look at it at a later date and time, I can do that and then continue working other invoices in the system. To the right of that, we have some shortcuts, one to an invoice search that we'll take a look at in a little bit. I have an invoice status report. So I know we've looked at a couple of examples of dashboard reports. Essentially, all this data is in on-base, and we can use the dashboard reporting tool to display that data in a format that meets your business needs. And the last thing down here is Unity form, which again, we have looked at in the other presentations today. In this scenario, this Unity form allows us to designate certain vendors as high priority if we want to have a tiered processing schedule for different vendors. If you have certain vendors that you want to process invoices for before everyone else, we can certainly set that up. Like mentioned before, personal page, this is my personal page. So if I want to move around the icons, I do have the ability to do so. I'm not impacting anyone else's. These different icons on the personal page can be pushed out on a group by group basis. So if you have a certain user group that you want to push out a standard set of tiles to, you absolutely can do that. Now, the first thing I want to touch on is searching for those invoices. So you'll see here on my personal page, I have an AP invoice search. I'll go ahead and click that, and it's going to open up a custom query window. Now, in this custom query window, you'll see the main part of the screen shows the different fields that I can search for invoices by. So I have invoice number, vendor name, invoice date, invoice total amount, status, and the assigned user. So you'll notice some of these fields do have dropdowns. Wherever possible, I like to use dropdowns because it allows for data consistency. You don't have users typing in, a vendor name or vendor address. If we can choose that from a dropdown, It just keeps that data consistent from one invoice to the next. So you'll notice for vendor name, we do have a dropdown, and I have 2 sample companies here. Now, once you've keyed in all the information that you want to search for an invoice by, all you would need to do is click search down here in the lower left. Because this is a demo system, I'm going to do a wide open search, but in a production environment, typically you would be keying in a vendor name or an invoice number or whatever you want to narrow down that search results list by. But I'm going to do a wide open search. And you'll see OnBase is going to return to me all the invoices that met my search criteria. Now, again, for those of you who have been sitting through the different presentations today, this is going to look very familiar, this results grid. There are some different actions that we can take on this grid. First is sorting. So if I click on a column header, you'll notice that I can sort ascending or descending by that particular column. The next thing I want to talk about on the results grid is filtering. So if I know my vendor name starts with a space company, you'll notice as I start to key that in, OnBase is live filtering down that list to only show me the results that meet the filtered criteria that I've started to key in. You also have the ability to use this as a dropdown, where OnBase will show you all of the different available vendor names in this scenario, and you can very simply just click on that vendor, and OnBase will do the same thing by narrowing down those results. Now with the results grid, the last thing I want to touch on is grouping results. So if I want to group these results by vendor, if I click and drag on that column header and release in the group by area, you'll see my results are now grouped by vendor name. So I can see A company has 3 items, B company has 3 items. And if I hit the drop down arrow, I can expand and see all of the items that are underneath that particular grouping. To release the grouping, all I need to do is click and drag, and you'll notice it goes back to the screen we were looking at when we first ran the search. Now, each one of these line items represents a different invoice. And to view these, all I need to do is simply double click. That will open up the document viewer, and I can see the invoice in the main part of my screen. Now, the first thing I want to touch on are keywords. So keywords are the metadata that is stored in the system that is related to this particular document. So you can see here when I click keywords, we have this little panel that opens out to the right, and I can see things like invoice date, invoice number, vendor name, some address information, information that is key and pertains to this particular document. Now, if I have the proper authority and the proper permissions, I can view these and edit these as needed if that's a part of my job process. Now, the next thing I want to touch on are cross-references. So as a part of this process, we are, for this demonstration, we've brought in some invoices via email and some invoices via regular physical mail. And one of the things that we can do is we can capture both the email that particular invoice came in attached to, or in this case, like we're looking at on our screen right now, this was a physical mailed copy. So we've also captured the photo of the envelope. And you'll see over here on my cross-reference, if I double click on this, this is going to show me a photo of the envelope. So that's just something that you can take advantage of. If there were any other supplemental docs that came in mailed with this particular invoice, those could be scanned and cross-referenced so that we can, see everything from one screen. You're not having to go search around for the different documents. To the right of cross-references, I'll briefly touch on history of a document. So if I have the proper permissions, I can view the history of documents within OnBase. OnBase does a really good job of auditing or giving us a full audit trail of everything that happens with that particular document. So you can see the different user, the date and the time, and then the different actions that they took. So whenever somebody views a document, adds a keyword, deletes a keyword, prints a document, emails a document, anything that occurs within OnBase with that particular document is tracked here, and we can report on that. You can also see workflow queues. So as a document moves through the workflow process, you can see the different users that it was assigned to and how long it stayed in each step. And this can be helpful to identify bottlenecks in a process. Maybe at a certain step, documents are taking twice as long than we feel they should. Maybe that's a step we need to look at, or we need to allocate more resources to that step. Again, all the data is tracked in OnBase, and we can report on it to help you with your business process. Close out of here. The last thing we'll talk about in the document viewer the send to features. So you can send it to a printer if you need to print a copy of this document physically. You can also send it as an attachment to a new email by using send to mail recipient. And last one, send to file. If you need to save a copy of this invoice to your local machine, you do have the ability to do so. Again, I want to mention all of these features are secured within OnBase. So if you have particular user groups that you don't want them to be able to email a document or print a document or save a copy, we do have the ability to secure that down based on user group. All right, so let me close out of here and close out of my search. All right, so now we're back on the personal page. So next we're going to be taking a look at workflow. So you'll notice here on my personal page, I have 3 different workflow queues that we briefly touched on earlier. The exceptions queue is what we're going to start with. To access the exceptions queue, you can see that there's one document here currently assigned to me. All I need to do is click on this personal page tile. And that's going to take me directly into workflow and directly into that exceptions queue. You'll see here, we'll have a list here over on the left-hand side of the screen of all the documents that are assigned to me in that particular queue. In this scenario, for this demonstration, there's currently only one. And the one that is highlighted in that list is the one that will be shown in the main part of the screen. Now, exceptions. So there's several different reasons why an invoice may be kicked out into an exceptions queue. Some of the things that we've set up in the past, maybe we're using Mailbox Importer and it's importing the emails that come into that monitored mailbox, and we see an email that comes in with no attachment. 99% of the time, when an invoice email is sent in, it's an email with a PDF attached. So when we see something that doesn't have an attachment, hey, we want to kick that out to exceptions and have somebody take a look at it. Maybe it's a spam email. Somebody just needs to take a look at that and see, what exactly went on. Why does that not have an attachment associated with that email? Some other reasons why things can get kicked out to exceptions. Maybe it's a non-standard file format. We do have clients who only accept and process PDF or image file format invoices. And maybe a vendor sent in something, an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document. This is an easy way to kick these out. And like Kelly had mentioned before, this gives us the ability to reach out to that vendor. Hey, you're sending in these invoices as a Word document. If you would like these to be processed quicker, please use a PDF or please use an image file format. Another reason why something may be kicked out to exceptions is if it's missing a required keyword. So if it went through some sort of automated forms recognition process and it wasn't able to identify maybe an invoice total amount, it could get kicked out to exceptions where somebody could manually look at that and then fill in total amount keyword as needed. Now, the example that you see on your screen is something that I have encountered with clients. Sometimes vendors will upload their invoices to, a secured portal that require you to, log in, download that invoice, and then you have access to it. So when you use a process like Mailbox Importer, we're going to bring in this email, but obviously it's not going to log into that portal and then download that invoice. So this is the queue for that AP specialist. Hey, we got an invoice from XYZ company. We need to log into that portal and download it. Once they've downloaded it, they can use this ad hoc task up here on the ribbon, replace current document with invoice. And what that allows us to do is we can browse out to that downloaded invoice, click open, and then we can fill out some information about this invoice. Invoice number, 409112, invoice date, say 31st. Vendor name, again, this is a drop-down list. This can reference an outside database. If you have a list of vendors that's stored in another application. And something that we can also do is if I type in company C, we can use OnBase functionality called an autofill keyword set. So based on the vendor name that I've keyed in or selected from the dropdown, when I hit tab, OnBase can do a lookup to an outside database and fill in other information. So in this scenario, from the company name or the vendor name, I'm going to grab the vendor address information so that users aren't having to, look at this document and fill that in. let's use OnBase to, eliminate some of that keying. Last thing I need to fill out for this one is the total amount. So I'll fill that in here, and then I'll click import. Now, because we are importing what's in essence a new version or a new revision of the document that was imported as a part of the mailbox importer process, I'm going to be required to enter a comment. Why am I importing a new copy or a new revision of this particular invoice? And so I'm going to say something like downloaded from external portal, and then click OK. You'll notice OnBase is going to bring in that invoice, and it is going to add it as a revision to that document. So now I'm seeing the latest revision, which is the actual invoice. And you'll notice up here in the upper right, we do have a revision button indicating, hey, there are multiple revisions of this particular document. If I click on that, you can see we have captured the original version that was brought in, and I can always double click on that and view the original document. But I can also see the latest revision was brought in as a PDF, and I can see that comments field. Hey, I downloaded this from an external portal. So we do have the ability to do that revisioning process. And for this particular scenario, we're downloading the actual invoice and bringing that into OnBase. Now, up at the top, you'll notice I have another ad hoc task here, exception corrected. And when I click on that, you'll see that invoice leave my screen, and it has now been sent into the unassigned pool where it can be assigned to a particular AP specialist and they can work that particular invoice.
Mike, one thing I wanted to mention there, we do have the capability when we have exceptions like those that require us to go out and download a document. We have the ability with RPA, or robotic process automation, to automate those processes. We could push them into a queue and have a automated process log on to the appropriate website and download those invoices. So we can and are getting to the point where we're going to minimize the exceptions, and so that fewer and fewer people have to look at and touch these documents. So I thought that was a good place to put that in, and I'll give it back to you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, so in the process, or the clients where we've implemented this process, we do notice the exceptions dwindle, because as users notice, hey, this vendor is sending an invoice this way, or we're having to go out to that external portal to download invoices, those vendors can be contacted. Hey, if you want to have your invoices processed quicker, here's the format, here's the the structure and how we're looking to have this set up. So yeah, exceptions do dwindle over time as we notice, those circumstances, but 99% of the invoices that come in never hit that exceptions queue. So you'll see I'm now back here on my personal page, and you can see in my AP specialist processing queue, I do have an invoice that's assigned to me. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And we can see here in the main part of my screen an image of that particular invoice. One thing I want to make note of, in this processing queue, you'll notice down here in the lower left, I do have what's called related items. And this functions almost exactly the same as those cross references we looked at before. If I open up my secondary viewer and click on this invoice envelope, here I can see an image of that particular envelope, or if this was an emailed invoice, I would see an image of that, that actual email that the invoice came in attached to. So just wanted to make mention of that. Close out my secondary viewer. So you'll notice up here at the top in the processing queue, we have different ad hoc tasks. So these are different actions that we can take on this particular invoice. The first one is to add a note. So if I click this, we'll add some note text, click OK. Think of these as virtual Post-it notes. So you'll see here, there's an image. If I double click, it'll expand out and show me, hey, AP user, which is the generic user that I'm logged in with, at this date and time, added a note saying this. You can choose to have those displayed on the document, or over here in the upper right, you can see an indication that there is a note on this document. And if there were multiples, you would see them listed here. All right, so next, update keywords. So if I click on update keywords, you'll see over here on the right will pop out a panel that shows all the keywords that are assigned to this particular document. So as I'm looking at this, I see 409-201. Let's pretend this invoice is actually 409-200 and it was captured incorrectly. I do have the ability to change that here, click submit. You'll see the screen refresh and that keyword has been updated for that particular invoice. Next thing we'll look at is placing an invoice on hold. So if I've been assigned this invoice and for some reason I can't process it right now, I'm waiting on some information from the department or whatever the case may be. I don't want to end the transaction, but I want to kick this into an on hold queue so that I can look at it at a later date and time and then move on with other invoices. All I need to do is click the place on hold ad hoc task in the ribbon. It's going to give me the ability to add a note, waiting on ... whatever the reason is why I'm placing this on hold, and I'll click OK. You'll see that that invoice has been sent to our on hold queue. And every time I log into the Unity client, I am reminded of that on my personal page. So just keep that in mind. You'll see when I place that one on hold, OnBase automatically assigned me a new invoice to process. So as we're taking these actions, whether it's placing on hold, approving it for payments, or some of the other ad hoc tasks that we'll talk about now, OnBase is going to automatically keep assigning the invoices to work through this process. So the next thing we'll take a look at is reassigning invoices. So let's say as a part of your business process, you have certain users who are working certain kinds of invoices or invoices for certain vendors, and maybe this invoice inadvertently got assigned to me. I do have the ability to reassign this invoice. So if I click that reassign invoice ad hoc task, I can choose from a list, a drop-down list, and choose the user that I want to assign this or reassign this invoice to. So we'll choose John Smith, click submit. You'll notice the screen will refresh. OnBase has assigned me another one to work. And one thing before I work that, I just want to show, when you do this invoice search, OnBase is keeping track of the current status as well as the assigned user for that particular invoice. So you can see the invoice that we placed on hold, and that's my username that I'm logged in with. We can see the invoice that's currently in my processing queue. And we can also see that this bottom invoice is in John Smith's processing queue. So keep in mind, this is being updated real time. If somebody calls in, hey, looking for a status of my invoice payment, it's very easy to find that within OnBase. We flip back to workflow. The next thing we'll talk about end transactions. So let's say for whatever reason, we are not going to be paying this invoice. We want to make note of that in OnBase so that we can keep it up to date, but we're not going to be moving this invoice through the process. I do have the ability to end the transaction. If I click on end transaction, again, it's going to pop a note where I can indicate, ending transaction because ... whatever the reason is, and click OK. Now, depending on how you want to have that set up, those end transactions can go to an end transaction request queue, where maybe a super user or a power user reviews those requests and either approves or denies them. Or if your users do have the permissions within your business organization to end those transactions themselves, we could skip this request queue and just have the transaction be ended. The last ad hoc task I'm going to talk about up here on the top is the approve for payment. So essentially what this task is going to do is it's going to mark it as approved in OnBase. It's going to keep track of the user who approved it for payment. And then what it does from there is really up to your business organization. Do we want to export a copy of this invoice to be imported by another system? Do we want to export a copy of this invoice and data that then gets manually keyed into another system? That's really up to your business organization's needs. We've done several different integrations at all levels, whether it's simply exporting a file that someone's then dragging and dropping, or full programmatic integration where we're sending the file and data to that outside system.
And Mike, that's a great point, because the financial system that is driving that isn't doing everything that these clients want it to, as far as managing that physical invoice through the process. And that's why they look to us, so that they can fill in those gaps and move it, get the visibility. But at the end of the transaction, they need the data and they need that invoice as a part of that transaction in that ERP financial system. So we have implemented a couple lately, one in which that data and the image are exported at the end, and it is immediately imported into the ERP system. The other in this client is using Munis, which a lot of people do, and they have a really good system, but their integration points are minimal. And so at this point, this client asks us to, hey, we need to get that invoice into Munis, and what's the best way to do that? And so when that user clicks this, it actually presents that image directly to that user, so they can drag and drop it right into the Munis transaction. And so that when it's final here and approved for invoice, approved for payment, they move it physically into the Munis system, so they can pay that system, pay that invoice from Munis, and have that complete transaction.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, I think the key is, OnBase is very flexible. These ad hoc tasks can be completely customized. So whatever your business need is, chances are we can accommodate that. So I'm going to click approve for payment here. You'll notice in this particular example, it's just marking as approved and exporting it to an outside system. Again, as soon as I'm finished with an invoice, OnBase is automatically assigning me the next one. We can also have it, like I had mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation, if you have a hierarchy of vendors where you have certain vendors that get processed before others, we can certainly accommodate that. One thing that I want to make mention is, as a manager level user, which is what I'm logged in with, I can utilize what's called queue administration. And this gives me a live look into the processing queues of all users within the system. So I can see here there are currently 2 assigned invoices in processing. I can see one is assigned to AP user, which is who we're logged in with, and you can see that here in bold. And then there's also an invoice that is assigned to John Smith, and I can see that indicated here. This gives me the manager level view of these particular invoices. And let's say, for some reason they need, the user needs me to reassign that particular invoice to someone else, I can do it directly from this screen. Now, one last thing I want to mention in workflow is the on hold queue. So these documents, or this particular document that I sent to the on hold queue, you'll notice right from on hold, once whatever I was waiting on has been finished, or I've received the documentation that I was looking for, I have the ability to do the same actions from the on hold queue. This is not holding up me processing those other invoices. And so the last thing I want to show, and again, I know we've looked at this a few times through the other presentations, are dashboard reports. So again, I just want to make mention the data is captured in OnBase. We can use things like dashboard reports to display that data in a meaningful way to you, managers, users, whoever needs access to that. So you can see quite simply here, I just created a simple bar chart that shows the different statuses of the invoices in the system. And then I have the same data displayed here in a pie chart. And again, like was mentioned before, I can't export this data, print it, or copy it and send it to someone else. And with that, that covers what I wanted to show today for the AP invoice automation process. And I will send it back to Kelly.